Welcome to Containerized Conversations. I'm your co-host, Josh Warhurst, and with me is
Jesse Caffarelli.
Hey Jesse, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Josh?
It's a wonderful Wednesday night, the night we always record these. We could do other nights too, but we're doing Wednesdays.
Yeah, it's like a perfect hangout session with my buddy.
There you go. And today we're going to talk about the 12-factor app, isn't that right?
Yes, the 12 factors. This is something I've heard of like a long time ago. And we actually kind of discussed this before we started recording, where actually some of these factors are kind of old school now, and there's a revamp. So for future episodes, we'll talk about that. But I think it would be really great to introduce our audience members to like kind of my old knowledge, at least at first. So with the 12 factors, it was really started for cloud native applications. And honestly, it was actually something you haven't heard of before, but you have a lot of experience with dealing at some of our previous jobs that we worked at.
Yeah, I mean the 12-factor app, it has like you said, it's a bit old, but only old in like the tech sense. It first came out in 2011. And it was designed around the fact that people were now deploying a lot of stuff to the cloud. But a lot of the processes are, kind of good for any app, right? It doesn't have to be just
Yeah.
cloud apps.
Yeah.
Modern development practices. And yeah, these are not necessarily the latest and greatest as of 2025, but I think the basis that they form is good.
Yeah, well, so a general definition is just making an application that's very environment agnostic, very scalable, and very resilient. And the definition was kind of made back when cloud was first created, but that definition actually should sound pretty familiar to some of our listeners who actually work in microservice architectures. And I think that's actually where the 12 factors kind of evolved into, is more of like the rules you should follow for just a microservice architecture.
Yeah, I mean, the different factors, the high level names, and you can look up these for details, but I can just read them down one by one. One is code base. So one code base tracked and revision control, many deploys. Two, dependencies, explicitly declare and isolate dependencies. Three, config, store config in the environment, something you're very passionate on.
For sure.
Four, backing services, treat backing services as attached resources. Five, build, release, run, strictly separate build and run stages. Six, processes, execute the app as one or more stateless processes. Seven, port binding, export services via port binding. Eight, concurrency, scale out via the process model. Nine, disposability, maximize robustness with fast startup and graceful shutdown. 10, dev/prod parity, keep development, staging, and production as similar as possible. 11, logs, treat logs as event streams. And 12, admin processes, run admin/management tasks as one-off processes. And if you go to the www.12factor.net, it's 12factor.net, you can look at any one of these factors and click into them, and you'll get a whole separate page on sort of the details of each of those factors. But it's honestly a quick read. All of these factors, the page is maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs. It's not too detailed. It's kind of to the point, and I think part of what they wanted out of it was something that was quick and to the point so that anybody could learn it, right? Because a lot of these end up being pretty fundamental to how apps are made. You can't just like push it in the last minute and get it working, right? So
some of them may or may not be applicable for our audience members, but some of them, things that you should do 100%. One of them you mentioned is you build and then you release and you deploy, and those should be separate stages. I mean, I actually feel like I violate that a lot of times at the companies I've been at. You've had some really great experience with some of these, with the application or the platform that you built at your current company, right?
One of the things that we worked on was a tool that we could run at multiple different sites, right? And we also ran it in the cloud. And even though we ran it on-prem and in the cloud, we're actually using the exact same piece of software. It just had, say, a different config, right?
Yeah.
And that was all an environment config. We could deploy it just the same to multiple different locations by modifying a file, right? Or a couple files.
Yeah.
And so users found it really easy to deploy. And when we had a new site that needed to come up, it wasn't complicated to then go and continue scaling that out.
You didn't have to build a new version.
Right.
Like, you could use the same exact version if you had if you didn't release a new version at all for 6 months, but you had 20 new sites come up, you could use that same version without building it.
Right. There was no need to build it. The new versions captured new features. They didn't capture basic building blocks to deploy it to different locations, which I have seen in the past. Right.
That's a really good way of putting it. I like that.
Apps that don't follow the 12 factors, like a lot of traditional apps before these concepts came around.
Yeah.
They might say, we're building it for the lab, so we have to make a new build, right?
Yeah.
We're building it for production, so we have to make a new build, right?
Yeah.
And the act of rebuilding it changes it, right?
Yeah.
I worked in the SeaWorld, right? And a lot of the compilers, like literally no two compilations were the same. You build it, and then 12 minutes later, you build the exact same image. And some of it might just be timestamps, right? But the binary is literally different.
Well, and I've worked at places where they will promote, they will quote unquote promote the version, but they rebuild the container every time. So in dev, they test it. Oh yeah, great. So let's promote it. But then they rebuild the container for QA or staging environment. And they test it again. It works. So then they promote it, but they rebuild it for production, right? And that means all of your testing in all of those previous is kind of invalid, especially if you use Python or NPM. A version of a dependency package could have been pulled in, a new version that you haven't even tested.
Yeah, high level, I think these factors are worth, at the very least, reading. I mean, it's honestly a 30-minute read, if that, depending on how fast you are reading. It's quite quick. I think in the modern day, I think when these came out in 2011, these were fundamental. A lot of the cloud services, right, like Google Cloud came out in 2008, Azure in 2010.
Yeah.
This was a nice way of driving the industry towards better products that performed well in the cloud. Now, I think that they're almost historical, but they're still relevant. I think that's the funny part about it, is that you will talk to developers who have been in the industry for 20 years, and a lot of these concepts are totally foreign to them.
Yeah.
They will consider rebuilding the project each time for each new environment. So in spite of this being somewhat dated, it's worth the 5 minutes it takes
for sure
to read it and then bring it out to your team.
Yep. So with that being said, thank you for listening to our conversation tonight. If you find anything interesting, leave a comment. Tell us what you want us to dive into. Maybe we'll do an episode on each factor with our experience. So we have a lot of suggestions on how to do them the right way. So just let us know. Well, that was our containerized conversation. I'm your co-host, Jesse Caffarelli.
And I'm Josh Warhurst. Have a wonderful evening.